Welcome everyone. We're gonna give it a minute or two just as people join. We have nearly 100 people registered, so just give everyone a chance to sit down, hopefully grab a cup of tea, and we will be starting very, very soon. I'll just go through housekeeping in a second, and then we will crack on. So while we're waiting, just to give everyone a structured activity to start things off, I'm going to ask my colleague Danielle to launch a poll. So Danielle, if you can hopefully launch a poll. Excellent, good. The technology works. It's always a bit of a fun activity to see if the technology and Teams work. So just to ask you, so do share, what are your top 3 campaign priorities for 2026? And I will share what people come back with. So do put that into the poll. It'd be great to find out, and this will help plan 3 webinars for 2026. It'd be good to find out what everyone's working on and use that to plan what's coming up in 2026. Oh, and I think we can actually see, as you put it in, we can see the word cloud come out from that as well, which is, I'm very excited. So I think we'll find out if local government reorganisation is going to be the biggest priority or not. So it'd be interesting to see what that is. So just while we are waiting, so just a few housekeeping rules as people join. This event will be recorded. If you're a member of the Chartered Institute of Public Relations, you'll be able to log this for CPD points. And as we go along, do put questions in the chat. So, oh, it's exciting to see the word cloud populate. So local government reorganisation is going down the list at the moment. So I think we are going to kick off and make a start. So very excited to have Mandy Pearse with us today, and she is an award-winning PR consultant, speaker, researcher, and former CIPR president, and now very, very excitingly is the author for the first time of Planning and Managing Public Relations Campaigns, a Strategic Approach, the sixth edition, co-authored with the intellectual powerhouse that is Professor Anne Gregory. So Mandy, how does it feel to be a published author?
Okay, hi everyone. Yeah, it's pretty exciting. It's been a bit of a whirlwind of a year working with Anne. I'm incredibly honoured that Anne asked me to co-author this 6th edition with her. And it's been a learning curve for me. I've never authored anything other than sort of council newspapers and magazines, that kind of thing before. So this is all new territory for me. Really exciting and a really good learning curve.
Okay, excellent. So can you just tell us a bit about the book and what's in it for people who don't know, and then we'll dive into that a bit more.
Okay, yeah. So the book itself, it sort of takes you through. There's a section at the start, which is we start off with, where is public relations in the organisation? How do we influence the top table? Where do we fit strategically? The importance of reputation and where campaigns fits within reputation. So we start with that kind of big picture. Then we look at some of the planning models that are available and talk about some of the advantages and disadvantages of various different planning models and how to use them. And then we go step by step, as you would expect. We look at research and insight. We look at aims and setting aims and objectives and how we do that. We look at stakeholders and content. We look at strategy and tactics, timescale and resources, and evaluation and review. So a classic kind of approach, but lots of depth within each of those chapters and lots of models and lots of case studies.
And I think I'm right in saying my book should be with me any day soon. It's a kind of mix of practical and theory as well. So for anyone interested, I've put a link in the chat to get a copy. It's kind of that mix of all of those different things, isn't it? That is correct.
Yeah, absolutely. So for someone like me who comes from a non-standard, say, PR background, so I don't have a public relations undergraduate qualification. Um, I'm not a journalist either. So if you come from other backgrounds, my background is more market research and marketing. It fills in a lot of the gaps with all the theoretical models around planning and around public relations. So it's really good for that. And also different models as we go through, like things like COMBI and EAST and OASIS and other planning models and evaluation models. But at the same time, we've got lots of case studies from public, private, third sector, both UK and international. So loads of different examples from very different backgrounds. So lots to think about there. And then we've got lots of examples just throughout the book when we're explaining a particular idea or concept. We've usually got an example as well, which isn't a case study, but it just works through exactly how it works.
Okay, well let's bring that to life because I think it'd be really interesting for people on the call to get some tips and advice on running campaigns. So what makes a good campaign? So particularly if we're thinking about people on the call thinking about how you structure a campaign, how you plan a campaign, what is the recipe for success to plan that really good strategic campaign that has deliverable outcomes? Sorry, I'm giving away a bit of the answer there, aren't I?
Well, I think it's very much about planning. So one of the things that comes up again and again is, well, what's the difference between a campaign and just a lot of the comms work that we do day to day? And the point about campaigns is that it's a much bigger activity. It should be delivering something towards your corporate values or your corporate objectives and goals. So if you've got a corporate objective to improve the reputation of your authority or your organization, then your campaign planning should be delivering campaigns which would enhance your reputation. So it might be in a local government context, the sort of traditional explainer campaign that shows all the different things that local government does, but it's a sustained set of activity. So it's not just a day, like an activity day, like International Women's Day, or a week. A campaign really to have some impact, and we're looking for things that are going to change things, move the dial. So we're looking for a sustained set of activities. So it might be 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 12 weeks, even potentially a year-long campaign. So if you were going to do something like introduce garden waste and show the return on the investment for your campaign, you're going to need to do it over a reasonable long period to get people to understand what it is and then get them to sign up. So a good campaign goes through a solid planning process. It's based on research and insight. You've identified the audience from your research and insight. You've got a clear link to your corporate objectives through your objectives for your campaign. You've got a clear strategy. Is it a public affairs campaign? Is it an internal comms campaign? Is it an influencer marketing campaign? So you've decided the strategy that you're going to use. And then you've got a set of tactics which are really well thought through. So your message, your messenger, your channels, all of that, and your content. And then we're looking to properly monitor it and evaluate it and then review, did it deliver what we're hoping to deliver? So it's got to go through all of those stages, and that needs time.
Yeah. And I think that leads on nicely. It's a really good question we've had in advance about when is a campaign and not a campaign. So what I mean by that is when do you decide you've got a load of comms on something, so you're putting together a number of different comms on launching a project or something like that. So when is it a campaign where you kind of put it in a campaign versus just a load of comms, and kind of what's the difference?
Right, good, really good question. I mean, I think what you're looking with a campaign is you're looking to make some impact with your audience, and usually you're trying to change behaviors. Not always, but pretty much we want people to do things, whether that's channel shift, maybe sign up for a direct debit, whether it's adopt a different recycling behavior. We want people to do something. So it's not just about informing people. It's not just about raising awareness, although campaigns can do that. In an ideal world, we're looking at a campaign to take our audience on a journey so that they understand what the topic is and why it's relevant to them. They feel like it's important and they want to do something about it, and they actually do that. So it's not just they like it and think, hey, that's a great campaign, but
Yeah,
actually they do what we want them to do, because otherwise we can't show any outcomes and we
yeah.
can't show return on investment.
And I think it's that also that kind of thing. I think if you use the Oasis framework, or have come across it, which is really popular, particularly in central government, and that will encourage you to think about what do you want residents to do, think, or feel, which is really useful. And I was just going to add in a few thoughts because I was having a conversation about this yesterday. That what campaigns are really useful for is to agree a plan at the start of the year with your kind of heads of service, and to push back. So if people are saying, "Can we do this? Can we do that?" kind of saying to them, "Look, it's not in the plan," and I think that's where you add the value as a kind of communicator, especially where you've got lots of people saying, can we do something on this awareness day, that awareness day? And if you're doing too much on awareness days, you end up with this kind of drip feed of things, and people start to switch off because it feels a bit tokenistic and not actually demonstrating value. So I think this leads quite neatly onto one of the other themes in the book, which is, as a PR person, how do you demonstrate value and get to the top table? And be good just to hear your thoughts on that and what you kind of cover in the book.
Yeah, absolutely. We talk a lot about in the start of the book about the organizational context for public relations and why we should be having that position at the top table as a strategic advisor. But the fact that just being good at comms isn't enough. You have to understand how communications delivers for the organization. So, how does it drive the finance of the organization? How does it integrate with the technology of the organization? How does it deliver on the big things that keep the chief executive awake at night, or the members or the board if you're working perhaps in a housing association context? So you need to be able to show not only that you're a great communicator, but how comms delivers on the big picture stuff. So we
Yeah,
talk about that in the start of the book, about what is that big picture? What do you need to know? And how do you make sure that comms fits in it and you're seen as that strategic, trusted advisor? And that's often, you know, Dominic and I will have talked about this before. It's about, being able to push back on tactics. So if someone
mhm,
arrives and says, I need an e-newsletter or a campaign or a video, being able to get them to take that step back and say, let's go through a strategic process here, and we'll diagnose together what you need, but don't let's jump into a tactic just because you think that's the right thing or you've seen it somewhere else, because it might
yeah,
not be the right approach for our authority or
yeah,
our organization.
yeah. No, 100%. And I'm just gonna leave you with a bit of a nugget from the legend that is Rory Sutherland, who's the set up the behavioural science function of the ad agency Ogilvy. Has a hugely popular podcast, really, really engaging. And one of the things that he talks about is that actually, in kind of comms and marketing terms, a lot of the time our challenge is to explain communications to people who don't necessarily get things like reach and impressions. So saying, we did this campaign, it delivered these outcomes, this is how it helps the organization save money or whatever, that's words and examples they understand. So that can be really, really important in kind of, I suppose, getting that message across. And the other thing is, I'm just going to give a plug for chartership as well. So if you are thinking about becoming chartered, a chartered member of the public chartered member of the Chartered Institute of Public Relations, if I can string the sentence together, then Mandy's book is really helpful for that. Did you want to say just a bit about chartership, Mandy, for anyone that's considering it at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you are considering chartership, there are lots of, if you're a CIPR member, there are lots of charter buddies as well, and the local public service committee will have people you can buddy up with who are happy to share a bit of time helping you think about it. But one of the things that is helpful in the book is that a lot of the sort of theory and models are covered in the book. So you can go into the chartership process with confidence about how those models apply, whether that's, OASIS or COMBI, because sometimes if we don't come from that background, and lots of us in public relations come from all sorts of wonderful backgrounds, sometimes customer service, sometimes we've been in a particular service in a local authority, and then we've moved into communications. We don't all come with that theoretical background. So it's really good for feeling confident. And there's some great case studies as well, which again help.
Excellent, thank you. So as we move along, do ask any questions. So there's lots covered in the book about what is a campaign, how to plan a campaign, around theories, all that kind of thing. And we'll cover a lot of this. So, and also about corporate responsibility, AI. So if you've got any questions as we go along, do drop them in the chat and we can cover those off. So I think we're gonna, as it's quite a hot topic at the moment, we're gonna move on to AI. So can you just tell us a little bit about what your thoughts are on AI and how helpful or not, as the case may be, is it when it comes to planning campaigns?
Yeah, we've been really lucky that some of the kind of really big thinkers, and Anne obviously was on the CIPR's AI and PR panel and one of the authors of some of the very early discussion papers on AI. And we've got a great contribution from Stephen Waddington and Ben Verinder, who've got a book on AI and PR coming out next year. And they very kindly given us a really nice theoretical model, which looks at taking the stages of our planning PR process and then thinking about how AI could contribute to the workflow in each of those steps. So it's thinking about what processes do we undertake where we could apply AI. We've also got a nice contribution from Stuart Bruce, again, a real thinker in this space. And he sort of particularly picks up things like summarizing, using AI to help us wade through lots of documentation and distill it down. Thinking about how we can bring our research together. So using AI to help us with our data analysis. So in that research and insight bit, we might have lots of data and AI can help us sift it, pull out trends, pull out insights. We can also use it a bit for compliance. So if we fed an AI our house style, our tone of voice, we can then, every time we write anything, ask the AI, is this compliant with our house style, our tone of voice? So it makes sure we get that consistency. It can help us a bit with planning. So we can say, here's what we're thinking of doing, put this into an OASIS framework for us. So that's helpful. And it also can do some evaluation for us. We can set our AI to look at our incoming evaluating data and again, pull out some insights and trends. And Stuart's particularly highlighted what he calls media mode transformation, which I rather love as a term. And
So,
it's
sorry, what was that called?
That's
Media.
media mode transformation.
So,
And
mouthful.
I co-train some courses with Stuart, and he's particularly hot on this, which is like taking your slides, taking a text document and creating a slide deck from your text document, asking the AI to look at your text and create that into a set of slides, or turning a report into a podcast. And he's got a lovely example of doing a two-person, two-voice podcast based on some copy, which is quite fascinating. And obviously language translation. So there's lots of exciting potential with AI in all aspects of planning and campaigns. I think the two kind of caveats to that is AI is the assistant, it needs the human oversight. So you've got to use your years of PR experience and judgment to look at what the AI is serving you up and maybe ask some questions, maybe prod it a bit. Don't just accept what you get at face value. Make sure you're comfortable with the sources the AI has used. You know, it might have used a source which you don't think is credible. So you might then say, okay, redo that analysis, but without that source, because I don't view that as a credible source. So you've got to use that human oversight and use it as a partner, not as a replacement for doing the work.
I think
And
that's the
probably,
danger, isn't it? That, it's like I use AI all the time, but it's kind of, I think there's a danger of starting off with AI, whereas not if you don't do the kind of upfront thinking yourself, then you kind of end up potentially with something, and also when it gets it wrong. So what I've certainly found helpful now is if you put stuff like that into Chat GPT, as you say, kind of ask it, what's the source of that information, cite that evidence, and that can be useful to see if it's made an assumption. And I think it's that kind of thing. A friend of mine is a leukemia doctor, and I asked ChatGPT to create a presentation for him, and it had loads of errors in it. But if the question had been framed to only use evidence for the past 5 years, it would have had those errors in it. So a lot of the time, it's how you use prompting and stuff like that. And we got to go comments about AI can write an award entry based on your evaluation report. So noting the LGC award entry deadline this week. So yeah, it is very good for that. But yeah, it's just, I think that check-in, you're right, it needs to you need to have that check in it, which makes a big, big difference. And Ruby's saying, my advice, if you still apply the human touch, there is a risk on how it comes across. And I think that's the other big thing, is that if you put something together written by AI, I think you get this. The issue now is that people kind of think, "Oh, that's written by AI," which is always the issue there.
and that's where your tone of voice for your organization, if you've got a tone of voice document, being able to apply that over what an AI has written will help as well, or feed it some previous documents that you've written so it understands your stylistic approach. And I think the other thing we just talk a bit about in the book is about being careful about cognitive offloading. So that is not doing the thinking yourself.
Yeah,
You've got to keep that's what you are, the critical expert. So the
yeah,
AI is your assistant, helping maybe do some of the more tedious, repetitive work, but you add that kind of critical strategic layer. And that's where you've got to be careful that you're actually intellectually interacting with it. So if it's a giant report, you might get the AI to do some summarizing for you. But at the end of the day, you've still got to read the report, because if your client asks you something
yeah.
very specific about the report and you've only got the AI's version, you won't necessarily be able to answer the question. So you've got to kind of use it, embrace it, learn about it, but use it with caution.
So I think that's a great sort of footnote to end on the AI discussion. So as this is a behaviour change lunchtime webinar. I thought it'd be good to talk a little bit about behaviour change. In the book, I think you talk a bit about two frameworks, COMBI and EAST, and there's a great example from Norfolk County Council. Did you want to say a little bit about behaviour change, Mandy?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of what we're talking about in the book works very well with behavior change. So all that research and insight bit absolutely plugs into doing effective behavior change. Also, that point about actually outcomes, we want people to do something. So often what we're asking people to do in a campaign is change behavior, even if that change behavior is buy the product. So we are asking people to focus on behaviour change all throughout the book, but we particularly highlight some of the GCS work around behaviour change. And we've got a lovely case study. Thank you to Norfolk County Council, Michael Travers at Norfolk. They did a really lovely piece around Travel Norfolk, which is their travel work. And it's a real challenge in a big rural area of getting people to change travel mode from something that's very carbon heavy, like using their car, to into public transport, cycling and walking. It's really difficult if the transport infrastructure isn't as good as, say, perhaps you're used to in London or Manchester or one of our big cities. It's a very different challenge. And they really effectively used COMBI and East and thought through the frameworks to build their campaign around Travel Norfolk, build the website and all the interrelated pieces of communication. So it's a nice case study that actually brings it to life. But I'm sure, Dominic here, as part of the behaviour change work that you do, you'll have lots of examples, I'm sure, around waste and health and those kind of areas.
Yeah, and I think it's really good. But I think that's the key point that you touch on, that actually that planning and that thinking through, that's a lot of the time having that upfront thinking is one, if not the most important thing you can do when you're planning campaigns, because that's when you get that behavior change. Do you want to say a little bit more about the kind of case studies you have? Share any useful tips and advice that have come out of that? So any kind of themes, anything you've seen that's interesting, especially by way of tips and advice that people listening will want to hear about?
Yeah, we've got a really nice mix of campaigns within the book from lots of different backgrounds and sectors. And I would say, don't rule out if you come from one sector, looking at what other sectors do, because there's always some little gem that you can pick out and say, oh, yeah, I can apply that in my context. So we've got a really good public affairs lobbying campaign by Appetito and Wiltshire Farm Foods. And it's a great example of how an organisation with not a lot of budget leverages absolutely every kind of tool in the toolkit to do a really effective public affairs campaign and change legislation. And that's what they achieved. So, and around waste and recycling of packaging in their industry. There's a really nice internal comms campaign, and that's from Lidl Romania. And that's the challenge of seasonal variations in your staffing. So in Romania, obviously they've got Black Sea resorts. The Lidl stores that are on the Black Sea suddenly get a surge of incoming tourists and massively have to ramp up. But they wanted to use their own staff who already know the systems. And so they've been a brilliant campaign. It's really quite exciting, and I definitely have a look at that. And again, it's not UK, but it could be very applicable to anyone who needs to suddenly have lots more staff. So it might be around, if you've got a visitor, a particularly heavy visitor season, and you're looking to ramp up your beach staff or your national park staff, that kind of thing. We've got a really good influencer marketing campaign. So that's for Portland's Park, and that was our colleagues Liz Lean, PR down in Bournemouth, who helped with that case study. And it's a nice example of how to use influencer marketing. if you're thinking about that as your core of your campaign. We've got some nice stuff around thought leadership. So in the professional sphere, how do you position your organization as a thought leader? So it might be a thought leader in climate change or in professional services. So we've got a nice example of that. We've got some interesting creative with a really interesting campaign for a company called Fish Tech Marine, which I'll let you find, but it's really how to take a very small insight in your research and suddenly make a campaign that really lights up and gets masses of interaction and coverage. We've got some crisis, a little crisis piece around, what happens when something goes astray and being ready for a crisis. And our colleagues at London Luton Airport helped with that.
And a big
And
shout out to Laurel quickly. I think she's just had to
yeah,
duck out, so I think she contributed a case study as well. So the evaluation
yeah,
queen is Laurel from Hertfordshire. We'll come back to evaluation.
yep, yeah, absolutely. And I suppose the other one, we've got some good media campaigns as well. And there's some nice frameworks from people like the World Health Organization. Um, if you're thinking about planning, we have a bang up to date case study that my colleague Anne had done some work with the Vatican around Vatican
Exciting.
University in PR. And we've got a
Wow.
lovely piece around the planning of the Pope's funeral, which
Oh
was an
wow.
absolutely, you can't get bigger than that,
No.
really. And so really useful how to plan for an enormous event like that.
Yeah. And yeah, that would be an amazing case study to read. I'm going to move the conversation on slightly. So, what should we talk about next, Mandy? Evaluation or corporate responsibility? I'll
Well,
give you the choice.
since we were talking about Laurel, let's talk about evaluation. So, um, it is the bugbear of our industry. We're not brilliant at it, and that is across the board. We're not brilliant at it. But if you want to win awards and you want to show return on investment and you want to show delivery of corporate objectives, the evaluation bit is absolutely critical. So there's lots of frameworks. There's some really powerful case studies. So talking about Hertfordshire County Council, they did a fantastic campaign around Ukraine sunflowers, which was to get more host families as we go on in the Ukraine conflict. Obviously, people can't always host people forever, and so new hosts are needed. So this was a great campaign about it, brilliant on the research, and very, very good on the evaluation at the end of the campaign. So yes, thank you to Laurel for helping us with that one. We've also got one from Philips Electrical, looking at how they evaluate. So a very different type of campaign, but looking at how they're evaluating and using evaluation frameworks. Um, and we've also got some colleagues, an agency called Hard Numbers, who do some brilliant stuff on the numbers bit and some really good evaluation from them. So moving from just showing it was great and some likes and followers, but to return on investment as well. So really good.
So look forward to reading all of those. So let's move on to ESG and corporate responsibility. So it might be worth just saying, so what is ESG and corporate responsibility might be a good place to start for people who might not be familiar with those terms.
Okay, so we talk about this very much in that organizational context bit. One of the things that for particularly the private sector, but is raising its head for public and third sector more and more, is corporate social responsibility, which is essentially beyond what our organization is our core purpose of maybe making a profit or delivering services. It's also what do we contribute to that wider community, our stakeholders in a wider context? And how do we make sure, in terms of ESG, that we are being a responsible organisation in an environmental context, in a social context? So things like EDI fit into that. And the G is about the governance. Now, if you come from a local authority background, we have a lot of governance. Housing associations equally, quite a lot of governance, because we've got layers of elected members. If we're working in police, we're going to have elected members on boards, fire. So we have quite large amounts of governance. So the governance bit tends to come back more for charitable sector, making sure boards of trustees are doing the scrutiny job they should be doing. And I sit on a number of boards, and I'm conscious of that very much, that we need to challenge. So whether you sit on whether you're a health trustee on a foundation trust or on a charitable board, your job as a board trustee is to scrutinize, not to just accept what you're being told by the management. And that's where we've seen a few issues in health, where boards have just accepted what they're being told and not scrutinized and not pushed around things like death rates that seemed abnormally high. And if you're thinking about something like the post office, real failure of governance around the board not pushing the management about, why are we prosecuting postmasters who've got no record of ever doing anything financially wrong, and asking the difficult questions. And in the private sector, it's very much about, beyond profit, what do we as a private sector organization contribute to the wider world, to the wider community? Do we, pay a fair wage? Do we look at our supply chain and make sure that it's robust in terms of the ethics of how our suppliers employ people, and maybe the environmental impact of our supply chain? So those kind of issues come up a lot in ESG, and it's all about corporate reputation.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting because the theme that keeps coming back in this conversation is that to demonstrate the value of communications, a lot of the time it's kind of pushing other issues, pushing organisational problems, weaving it all together. And I think as communicators, we're uniquely positioned to do that, but kind of always pushing it back to the outcomes, always pushing back to how you can help organisations in a time of dwindling budgets. This is really, really important. So yeah, I think that's a really good point that keeps coming back. And thank you to Ruby again for posting the discount code in the chat. I've just posted the link to Mandy's book, and I think the best place to get it from is Kogan Page rather than Amazon, because that's where you can use the discount code. And it looks like it's still live. Is that the case, Mandy? And we can send around the latest code.
You can use, I think Ruby had used a Hello 25 code. There's also a Kogan Page 25 code that should work as well, which is my author code. Yeah, you should get a better discount there than you get from Amazon, but it's always worth, checking both, just to see where you're going to get the best value.
Excellent, thank you. And do you have any? This is a question that I'm really keen to ask, so I'm going to ask it, which is, do you have any tips for aspiring authors in the virtual room?
Okay, I suppose tips for aspiring authors. Be prepared for a lot of work. I kind of probably didn't anticipate how much work beyond the writing there was going to be. So you think, okay, I've done the writing, I've proofed it, well, I've read it through, I've done what needs to be done. But actually, there's quite a lot more. So there's quite a lot in terms of checking, generating the graphics, which often now falls to the author. You might think that publishers have a whole host of designers and illustrators in-house. No, they don't anymore. Like everyone else, they've seen a squeeze. you will end up doing another set of proofreading. We work with a professional proofreader as well. And you might think, well, I do proofreading as part of my job. And Anne and I spent lots of time proofreading each other's chapters. But even so, our professional proofreader highlighted things to us and said, well, that doesn't quite make sense to someone who isn't as, really in depth into the book as you guys are. So maybe you need to think about how you frame that. You've maybe not been consistent, So it's the book is about 80,000 words, so it's long, and being consistent in your terminology all the way through the book is a real challenge. And obviously, with two authors, we had to make sure we were consistent. As I say, you think you've finished, and every time you think you've finished, something comes back again. Um, so things like we had some lovely people who've done us a set of endorsements. So thank you to Andrea Newman at the Local Government Association, who pre-read the book and gave us an endorsement. To Fazana Baduel, the incoming president of CIPR, again, who took the time to read the book and give us a thoughtful reflection on it. Corey Camgos from Taylor Bennett Foundation. We wanted to make sure that we had always been mindful of the EDI issues throughout the book. So, and there were many more, but we really thank those people who pre-read the book for us and did that. But as I say, every time you think you've finished, there's a bit more to do. So it is time consuming. I don't think being an author makes anyone rich anymore, unless you're maybe J.K. Rowling, but possibly not in the more sort of academic and general sector. I mean, you could be a Malcolm Gladwell and get the tipping point, but there aren't that many PR marketing books which end up in New York bestseller lists.
Yeah. I was going to say a Kogan Page book it's not something you write a business book to make yourself rich, and it is interesting just to see because there's so many different kind of, I suppose, routes to go down. Doing it for an established author like Kogan Page, or publishing your own book yourself, which is really, really interesting. We could go on, but I'm just going to ask if anyone does have any other questions, do drop them in the chat. I'm going to ask Mandy to kind of give us some final thoughts, any tips, advice you'd give people on running campaigns. What I will say is, do buy a copy of the book if you haven't already, because it's a really useful summary, as Mandy says, a kind of blueprint to ensure that you run successful campaigns. And I think it's regardless of scale. So if you're trying to do stuff on a budget or with lots of money, this book will be really, really useful and very good at kind of thinking through like context, research, analysis, goal setting, different approaches, tactics, time management, resource allocation, and most importantly, evaluation and review. So that's really good.
Okay.
What do you do? Any final tips?
Okay, I think there might have been a slight glitch there, but absolutely. In terms of I think that one thing I would say about campaigns is be prepared to push back to your senior managers or whoever's asking for the campaign, whether that's your client or your senior managers, and take them through the process. We've got a 12-step process. Take them through it and try and get them to tell you what it is they want to achieve. That's the kind of bit that is woolly. If you can get your person you're delivering the campaign for to articulate what is it that really they want to achieve, what worries them, what keeps them up at night, what does success look like for them? Get them to sort that bit out, and then you can start really doing the campaign planning. But if you just say yes when they come to you and say, I want a campaign, what tends to happen is you then end up with a campaign where they've they'll throw in, well, I want some tactics like this. And you might be thinking, well, those aren't the right tactics. But because you haven't had the bigger conversation, it's much harder to push back. So it's definitely use something like the 12-step process that's in the book to take people on a journey and get them. Often they'll have research that they've got within their service or department. So there might be lots of research already, but they don't see the insight in it that you might see. So it's definitely working with people, but getting them to be more structured as well will help you. And the other thing is budget and time. The more time you have, the more you can do it on a shoestring. And many of the campaigns in the book were done on really, really small budgets. Even some of what you might look at the private sector and think, oh, they've got hundreds of thousands of pounds. No, often they haven't either. So often they're done on quite lean budgets. But what they do is take the time in the planning. And I think that's the thing. If people want things last minute, it's going to be expensive because you have to commission things.
Yeah. And I think that comes back to the crux of the point, that having that planned approach, sitting down with kind of heads of department service at the start of the year, planning it out, that's where you kind of add value as a comms person, and thinking through that kind of, saying to them, if you could wave a magic wand, what one thing or three things would you like us to solve with communications, and working with them on that. So we could carry on for hours, but I think we're going to call it a day. So thank you so much, Mandy, for coming along. It's been really, really interesting to hear about your book. Can't wait for it. And I'll share the link and the discount code in a follow-up email. This will share.
I think we're having a bit of difficulty with Dominic's webinar, but what he's generally saying is thank you everyone for attending.